Good morning, Jack. Heath, J-Dog, and the board's heat hot advisory. It is in effect through today into tomorrow. Probably some thunder boomers tomorrow afternoon. A more comfortable Friday. Good morning, New Hampshire. Good morning up into Maine. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google. Play the pulse of NH. We're going to hear in a moment from our own White House correspondent, John Decker. He was with the president yesterday asking him about why 50 days he's giving to Vladimir Putin. Also, pretty direct questions about Jerome Powell. But first, newsmaker out of the gate, State Senator Dan Innes, been on the show quite a bit during the state budget process, with some news on the U.S. Senate race as a Republican. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Jack. How are you today? Staying cool, I hope.
Yes. So let's hear the words right here in your first radio interview, I guess, as a U.S. Senate candidate. Are you running for the U.S. Senate as a Republican?
Jack, I'm pleased to announce that, yes, in fact, I am running for the United States Senate as a Republican, and I look forward to a spirited race and carrying New Hampshire's values and message to Washington, D.C. I think it's time that we sent some new voices to Washington. We've been sending, basically 4 Democrats every cycle down to Washington, D.C., and I think most of them have lost touch with who we are here in New Hampshire. And one of the things that I'm excited about is the fact that I've had 3 terms in our state Senate. I've been at the University of New Hampshire for 18 years, and I've seen thousands and thousands of New Hampshire's young people come through the university. I really know this state well. I understand what people want, what my constituents want, and I think I'm the best candidate to beat Chris Pappas come fall.
We'll talk about Chris Pappas in a moment, but in your way for the primary at this point is former U.S. Senator and U.S. Senate candidate Scott Brown. He has probably, some would argue, statewide, just from past races, maybe broader name recognition. How do you win that primary?
That's an interesting question, Jack, and I think it's just a matter of contrasting our backgrounds and experience. And as you know and have noted on the show, and we've talked about, I've done a lot of things here in New Hampshire in particular, started several businesses. We have a business here at the farm raising Wagyu and selling eggs. And, being dean at the University of New Hampshire, I'd remind your listeners, we built the Paul College at UNH, a $50 million building with no state money. It's the only academic building ever built at UNH without state money. And that's something I'm particularly proud of. And I think it's demonstrative of my sort of can-do attitude. Let's identify the problem. We'll figure out how to get it done. It may not always be easy, but that's what we're elected to do, and that's what I'll do in D.C. I'll make the hard votes, and I'll do what's best for my constituents back here in New Hampshire. And that's the way I've tried to behave as a state senator, and I'll continue to be that person in Washington, D.C.
Senator, one of the things I think is going to be a differentiator in the midterm elections, if you were to be the nominee and facing Chris Pappas, if he's the nominee, real quickly, and that is the big, beautiful bill. And Democrats are already talking about Republicans are going to take away your health care. Republicans are going to take away your health care. Now, we won't even know until 2028 what this is in terms of Medicaid, Medicare. But when you hear that argument versus things like work requirements or job training with Medicaid, how do you respond to that if that's going to be the accusation that Dan Innes wants to take away your health care?
There's such crazy arguments that are being made, Jack. The Democrats don't have a message right now, and I'm not sure they can find one with the path that they're on. So because they don't have a message, their job apparently now has become one of getting the public worked up by saying things about bills and laws that are patently false. I mean, you look at the Medicaid so-called cuts. I don't know where else in the world other than Washington, D.C., where a major increase in spending is a cut. The only change was that able-bodied people need to work 20 hours a week. That's it, if you don't have kids. I think most voters and most people see that as something very logical. And then you look at the tax cuts that are a part of the bill. First, the continuation of the cuts that were made some years ago, but also some new ones, like no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. These are hardworking people that are out there, for the most part, making hourly wages. Right. And Chris Pappas doesn't want them to have a tax cut. I don't understand that. How you can say you support the working class and then vote against a tax cut for them is beyond me. So Democrats don't have a message. They're trying to get people scared. But people are smart, particularly New Hampshire voters. And I think most of the people I talk to see right through it.
Do you want to get? Would you seek Donald Trump's nod or endorsement in this U.S. Senate race? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. And I know a lot of people have a difficult time with the president's personality. I'm not one of those. He's a business guy, as am I. But when you look at his policies, particularly this term, this is a president who came in with a plan. He had a strategy. And, some in the media say, oh, the chaos around tariffs. All of that's somewhat intentional. This is the way a lot of business people operate. And the media doesn't quite get that. And I think he's doing one heck of a job getting his agenda implemented, and it's working for the American people. We have a secure border for the first time in years. We know who's coming in. We know who's not. And everything's headed in the right direction. And the polls of the American people are showing that they, by and large, believe we're moving on to the right track after being on the wrong track for 4 or 5 years.
J-Dog, Senator Ennis, if you could, I can either continue with Dan Ennis for a minute, or we can get in John Decker, quick hit from the White House. J-Dog, can we do both? Can Dan Ennis hold on? Dan, can you hold on 1 minute? I want to continue our interview.
Absolutely.
All right, John Decker, our own White House correspondent. Well, the president yesterday, busy day yesterday, and your questions were lighting it up once again, John Decker, almost like years ago when you asked him, why don't you fire James Comey? You asked him about Jerome Powell. You also asked the president, why are you giving Vladimir Putin 50 days with the Ukraine?
Well, that's right. These are two things that certainly are in the news. As it relates to Jerome Powell, the president has a very contentious relationship with the Fed chairman. I asked the president, when was the last time they met? And what did they discuss? The president said they met a few weeks ago in the Oval Office, and the president told the Fed chair that he was not doing a very good job. I asked the president if he intends to nominate Fed chair Jerome Powell for another term. His term ends next May, and the president gave me a 4-word answer. He said, "Are you kidding me?" So that gives you a sense, Jack, that I don't think that's likely. And then on Ukraine, I asked the president, why are you giving Vladimir Putin 50 additional days to prosecute his war against Ukraine? The president, I don't think, liked the question. He initially said that he didn't believe that 50 days is a particularly long period of time. And then he asked me a question. He said, why didn't you ask that question to Biden? I told the president that I did ask very tough questions to Biden about the war in Ukraine. And he asked me what were his answers. And I said, the answers weren't very good, Mr. President. So this is a frustrating thing for the president in the sense that he's talked about, he's had very good conversations with Putin, but they don't lead to any change in his actions. Continued attacks on civilian areas in Ukraine every day.
And finally, are we going to see from the Attorney General something more on the Jeffrey Epstein files or not? Is that door open now or shut?
That's a very good question. The president essentially has put this in the Attorney General's corner in terms of whether or not to release additional files. She has indicated that she does not intend to do that, but now some pressure from very strong supporters of the president in the MAGA base, the House Speaker calling on a release of those files, as is Marjorie Taylor Greene, another strong backer of President Trump.
All right, John Decker, thank you for the time. Our own White House correspondent. Dan Ennis, state senator, announced, or his first radio interview, I believe, is this your first live radio interview since you're a candidate for the U.S. Senate?
It is indeed.
All right, let's continue talking. If it is you and not Scott Brown in the primary, in the nomination, how do you beat Chris Pappas? He's entrenched. He's been in there. He's going to have a lot of fundraising, as you know, and support on the Democrat side. He may freeze the field. He may get a challenger. He may not. How does a Republican win that U.S. Senate seat back?
I think it's about enthusiasm, Jack, and I don't see a lot of enthusiasm around the Chris Pappas candidacy. I really don't. And I think, it's done with a lot of hard work, but also drawing the contrast between us. He and I have very different backgrounds, and I know he grew up in Manchester, families in the restaurant business, that sort of thing. But Chris Pappas went to Harvard. I went to public universities. And I think, he was sort of born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and I was born with a wooden spoon in my hand. We grew up poor, and we didn't have much, but my parents emphasized education. I'm the first in my family to go to college, paid my own way, worked my way all the way through to a PhD. And then spent time in academia, and then eventually jumped into business. And I've built businesses and made them successful. We're trying to do the same thing here at Farm. It's a different kind of business, but it's going well. And I think that experience is going to resonate with the voters of New Hampshire. I'm a lot like everyone else in this state who, as a child and as a young adult, struggled financially, tried to make ends meet. I started working at a really young age so I could help the family and cover my own expenses. And that's made me, I think, a better senator than I would have been had things been easier. It's that adversity in those difficult times and that hard work that really makes us into better government officials. And I think I'm ready for this and well prepared to go to DC and work down there.
All right. I guess the only other question is, when you look at the Republican Party in New Hampshire, is it the party of Donald Trump, Senator Ennis?
I think it's a party of the principles of Donald Trump. Yes. We're all about small government, keeping taxes low, keeping government out of your life. I mean, that's really, to me, what it's about, Jack. And look, I really believe in small government, and we've seen the opposite of that in Washington, D.C. I know some people got, enraged almost about the DOGE cuts, but that is exactly the activity that we need. We need to look at every penny that we spend and determine whether or not we actually need to do that. Look, I'm a marketing professor. I'm all about delivering value to the customer. So how do we deliver value to the taxpayers? And let's make sure that we're getting the best value we can for every dollar the taxpayers send us. And I think that's a fundamental principle of good government that has been lost in Washington, D.C., but not here in Concord.
Gracious for your time this morning. And before I let you go, Senator, just a topical type question, because if you do get this, these are the types of things you'll be facing. Today, the U.S. Senate, if you were in the Senate, representing New Hampshire, is set to vote on canceling about $9.5 billion in funds, and some of this would affect public media. And
Yep.
I asked you this question because it's been an ongoing subject or debate sometimes in New Hampshire with the legislature or federal dollars. And the question really is the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. I think they dole out or distribute money to like 1,500 TV and public radio stations like NPR or PBS here or New Hampshire Public Radio. Would you vote yes or no on this?
Oh, I would vote yes. And I understand the concerns around public broadcasting. I get that. Everybody, watched Sesame Street as a kid or something like that. In my case, Mr. Rogers. But with the proliferation of media that we have today and all the information that's out there, you really have to question, does the government need to support broadcasting that tends to be biased? It'd be one thing if the Corporation for Public Broadcasting did what it should do, which is present both sides of the issues and let people make their own decisions. Mm-hmm. But they've moved away from that in the last 20 or 30 years, like so much media. So, for that reason, and, when the private sector is successful in an area like broadcasting, why does government need to subsidize any of it? I don't think we do.
Finally, I did ask John Decker was talking about the Ukraine, President Trump trying to turn up the heat with this arms deal indirectly, really, with NATO directly to manufacture and then distribute for Ukraine to defend itself, saying Putin's words have been meaningless in the past. President Trump has been accused of appeasing Vladimir Putin. But if you were a senator, the ongoing support of Ukraine, American tax dollars on weapons and other support in their war against Putin and Russia, what are your thoughts on Ukraine? Like a 20,000-foot view, if you were asked this in the Senate, what are your thoughts on the war in Ukraine?
Well, Russia is certainly the aggressor here. Putin's someone who can't be trusted, and there's no question about that. I think the president has done a really good thing in this latest round. American weapons, American technology that will help Ukraine to defend itself will be sent over. But the European Union folks are going to pay for it this time. And I think that's a really nice direction for things to be going, because Ukraine is probably more important to Europe than it is to us. And I think working together, we can stop Putin, and it'll probably take sanctions, and I would support that. We're going to have to put a stranglehold on Vladimir Putin if he's going to come to the table. And I think the president has started to realize that.
Dan Ennis, his first interview live since he's become this morning about the star of the show, a U.S. Senate candidate in the Republican side, also in the race, Scott Brown, former U.S. Senator and Ambassador, Chris Pappas, the Democrat, the main Democrat right now. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, the Pulse of an Age Senator. We'll get you back again soon. Either way, we can say Senator, right?
You can indeed. I like the title. Let's keep it.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll take a quick break. A lot of news right there. A lot of news. Hey, Alexa, hey, Google, play the Pulse of an Age. Hot and humid and hazy a little bit. Well, the sun's out there, but it's hot, and the heat advisory through today. Back in a moment.
So what does a governor do Good Morning New Hampshire, live from the Outdoor Pride Studios. Now, back to Jack on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
So let me try to recap a little bit. We'll tell you our poll question up on X this morning at the Pulse of an H on this Wednesday morning. Heat advisory in effect for most of our region right through today, tonight, into tomorrow, and then tomorrow afternoon. Could have some pretty good thunder boomers to break this more comfortable on Friday and the weekend. Our poll question up on X at the Pulse of an H. Are you worried about losing health care with the big, beautiful bill, as some of the Democrats are claiming with Medicaid and Medicare? It's going to be a real central issue in the midterm elections. You just heard that from one of the candidates now running in the U.S. Senate, Dan Innes. Chris Pappas, the Democrat, running on the other side at this point, the main big name for Democrats. And you're going to hear Republicans want to take away your health care. The problem is a lot of this doesn't even kick in until 2028. So I don't know how you make people feel they're losing something in the midterms, but that will be the attempt. But we ask you, are you worried about losing health care? Do you think people, yes or no? Just asking you straight up on our poll question. J-Dog can give you results. We were off because of the X yesterday. It was actually down a little bit, so we'll just go with that for tomorrow. Coming up, actually, in our Binney Media headquarters here in Concord, the folks with NAMI on the mental health side, they do great work. They're having their breakfast and their big meeting. We're going to hear from some of them live in our building in the 10 o'clock hour. You've heard me talk a lot about anxiety, stress, and depression, mental health. We've not done a very good job at all, locally, regionally, and nationally on this. We're going to try and do much better as we go forward. And a little bit later on, some of our regular contributors. But out of the gate this morning, we had in his first live media radio interview, State Senator Dan Innes officially announcing the words. He's running as a Republican in the U.S. Senate now. And that race is really underway, even though the midterms are a year from this fall. But a political calendar, these things are over a year, as you know. I mean, people forget when, even in the second term, when Donald Trump first announced he was running for president again. It's interesting to see this race because Scott Brown, regular, has been on the show quite a bit. He's been a senator, U.S. senator. He ran against New Hampshire. He lost a pretty tough race, really tough race. Many people, if you remember, with U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, he was an ambassador in the Trump administration first term, New Zealand, in that State Department role in that region. But Dan Innes, state senator, very interesting. We're going to hear from Neil Levesque in a little bit, J-Dog, 9:35 on this. He brings that more local legislator, fresh out of the state Senate approach, but he's got that business background he spoke about in the interview at University of New Hampshire as a dean and also on his own. It'll be quite a contrast because you have sort of the state New Hampshire state senator versus Scott Brown in the primary, because to take on Chris Pappas, presumably the Democrat nominee, although you never know, that I would think Chris Pappas is successfully frozen that field. It's going to come down to name recognition, fundraising, execution, and campaigns. And it should be whatever people say, and I'll defer to our analysts and political all-stars and experts. This will be a race. Dan Innes he's run before. For Congress, he's a state senator. He knows how to do this, and pretty sharp with his words in terms of, I asked him if a Republican could win the Senate seat back. It's been a long time on the federal side. He said yes, and he goes right at Chris Pappas. So we'll see where it goes, but his first interview live here. First, WMUR having a story as well, but Dan in his first interview this morning, radio interview live, announcing doing the interview live this morning here on Good Morning Hampshire, the Pulse of NH, and we'll be having more on all of the above. A couple of the other stories that are breaking this morning. We had John Decker, our own White House correspondent, and John's a pretty good. He asked good questions of President Trump. People forget when the whole dust up recently with Elon Musk, it was John Decker who just basically said, like he did yesterday in the White House, who's our own White House correspondent, asked President Trump. I think President Trump has a good back and forth with Decker. He asked, what's going on with you and Elon Musk? And Trump went on for 8 minutes blasting Elon Musk. He asked him yesterday about Jerome Powell and the Fed and why are you giving Vladimir Putin 50 days? So interesting back and forth, a lot going on. And we are, as I said, we're now climbing into What is today? July 16th. We're coming up to about the 9:30 mark. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google. Play the Pulse of an H. Check out our Pulse podcast network as well. New editions out this week for Contact Politics, Bet This, and a whole lot more. We'll be back on the Pulse of an H. Making news first right here in a moment.
News. Now back to Jack Heath on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
So, J-Dog, you like that format? You like the results last night? I guess we'll go to our next guest. But, J-Dog, you were all pumped up this morning. You like the format and the outcome last night in that game?
I do, especially when I had the National League winning. Although, again, Steve Kwan of the Cleveland Guardians is the reason why the game was tied. He ran out that ground ball, and he's a fast guy. He hits for average, and he did that, and the run scored from third. It tied the game in the top of the ninth inning to get to the bottom of the ninth inning, which ended up leading, of course, to the swing off in the 10th inning. So.
All right, good stuff. Thank you. We'll come back. I'm sure you're going to be talking a little bit about it with CJ and Bet This.
Oh, yeah.
All right, tomorrow our state police segment brought to you by AutoFair. We'll hear from the Marine Patrol, and they're busy out there on fresh and salt water. Let's switch gears back to some of the news out of the gate this morning. In his first media live radio interview, State Senator Dan Ennis saying the words he's running for the U.S. Senate race as a Republican. His main challenger right now, Scott Brown, former U.S. Senator and Senate candidate, And Neil Vec, one of our political analysts and all-stars, St. Anselm College Institute of Politics. No surprise, I had said for a while, Innes was jumping in. It's official on my show this morning. Dan Innes in, and Neil, your reaction?
Well, it's great news that he announced on Good Morning New Hampshire. I think it's here's a whole string of things that you got to listen to the show if you don't want to miss things. I think he's well spoken. He knows issues. He's served in the state Senate. He's been in 2 different districts. He's a small businessman. He's been in academics. He has a PhD, so well schooled. He knew what to say, the points to make on your show. I think he's definitely a credible candidate, and it's not surprising. I don't think that there's a Republican primary between he and Scott Brown and maybe someone else. That being said, he did embrace Trump. That's kind of a place where I see. I always look for that, because if a candidate is sort of saying, well, I'm an old style Republican, I'm not a new style Trump Republican, they may have a tough time winning a primary. He didn't do that. He's fully on board with the plan, with the Trump plan. And I would assume he's trying to get the Trump nod at this point. And so with Scott Brown.
Yeah, interesting. On this one, I would say in past races, when you had Scott Brown, and I asked Senator Innes, how do you beat Scott Brown? He's got a bigger, broader name, probably name recognition and profile, having run and been a senator and running. And I think he started by saying, good question, but he went on to say that it'll contrast differences. But you have this classic, Dan, in his recent time has been in the state Senate, particularly on the fiscal side, the budget side. We just had a big budget process, as you know, and he was a broker in that, teaches at UNH. So you have this kind of sharp state senator running against a former U.S. senator. I think both will get their fair share of support. I imagine it comes down to campaign, supporters, execution, and fundraising. How important is the Trump nod in a Republican primary for the U.S. Senate here, Neil?
I think it's the most important thing. If you're going to win a Republican primary, if Donald Trump comes in and says you're the person who's going to get his endorsement, it's absolutely critical. All things being equal, as you mentioned, a lot of these 2 candidates are well spoken. They know the issues. They're probably going to be similar on a lot of issues. So someone who gets a Trump nod, and that being that you've got the ability to go out and project the fact that he's endorsed you, that takes money. That's all going to be a critical factor in this race. That being said, that may also be the factor that hurts you in a general election if Donald Trump's numbers are where they have been in the past, which is significantly lower than 50%. So it's careful what you wish for. You win a primary because Trump helped you, but you may be handicapped with that Trump endorsement in a general election in a state like New Hampshire.
Interesting. Now, the question I have for you, Neil, is a sort of speculative. Neil Vec, Institute of Politics, St. Anselm. Is if Scott Brown, I let me just cut to the chase. I would have thought, Neil, since Scott Brown's now been in the race a few weeks, and it was no surprise, he was out there seriously talking. I had heard in the same period, Dan Innes was also going to Washington, speaking to like the Republican, the U.S. Senate arm, as well as maybe the White House. And I would think that if Scott Brown were to have gotten a nod from Trump because people have to forget it was on this program, my program, Good Morning New Hampshire, here at the Pulse of NH, when former Governor Chris Sununu came in early in the week on a morning, and there was a lot of speculation because he had opened the door of running for the U.S. Senate. In fact, he just met with President Trump in almost an hour-long Oval Office meeting over the weekend, and Trump came out Sunday night saying he liked the governor, Chris Sununu, now thought it'd be great to run for the U.S. Senate, could win the seat, and had his encouragement and endorsement. And then it was on my program, and the next week, I believe, Chris Sununu came out when I asked him, are you running for the U.S. Senate? He said, no, I'm not going to be running. No, and it made the news. So Donald Trump, the president's already stuck his toe in this race once. And I asked Caroline Levitt subsequently after that interview if they were disappointed. She said, let's just say we were surprised that Sununu didn't run. I guess the question is, Now Scott Brown, Dan Innes, two serious Republicans running. Does the White House, because of the importance of a U.S. Senate race, take a new look at this race? Would they have already endorsed Scott Brown by now if they wanted him? Will they look at this? And what if they don't like either Brown or Innes? Do they try and get someone else, another person here in New Hampshire who's more in the Trump camp, if you will? Because I asked Dan Innes, is the Republican Party in New Hampshire the party of Trump or not? And he said, well, kind of a yes and no answer. So my question is, the Trump factor, what happens now? Does the president look at one of these two, or does he shop for a third?
Well, I think everybody's always shopping for a third. If you're in the White House, you're shopping for the perfect candidate who can win against the Democrat. That being said, I think they sit back, watch these two candidates, and see who has the potential to win a primary and win a general election. I mean, there's a lot of time, and a lot of candidates, they fail on raising money, or for whatever reason, they sputter out. Remember that we have about 10 months to go before they even file for the office. So there's a lot of time. Candidates, again, may not do well and then take a second look and say, I'm out. And this has happened way before filing periods before. So there's no reason to get for Trump to give an endorsement this early. I think you sit back, you wait, see what happens. And at some point, I would assume that Trump will endorse in this race. He's going to want to be the kingmaker, and he's going to want to put his finger on the throttle.
And again, what do you think here, looking at Brown and Innes? Do you think there's someone there, one of those two, or what do you think? I know you said it would be everything, a Trump endorsement. So I'm asking you, take it one more step.
Whoever looks to be the strongest candidate against the Democrat is the one that he'll endorse, frankly. I think that, it is strange that someone who served in his first administration isn't getting an immediate endorsement. Maybe they're sitting back and saying, let's see how well Scott Brown does in this. And now there's Innes. How much money can someone who's in the state Senate raise? Obviously, it's a great place to be to raise money, but we're talking about a lot of money. So, these are challenges that both these candidates. There's a lot of time here. Who's going to start racking up endorsements, money, etc.? Endorsements and things like that are trivial and probably in the end, other than a Trump endorsement. But what they do is that they signal to donors and other people, hey, this person is moving and I should get on board.
Interesting. And I guess the last question is, in the beginning, is there one of these candidates that looks more attractive to you in terms of being able to win a primary, Brown or Innes? And is it too early to say who'd be more successful against Chris Pappas?
I think it's too early to say. We don't even really know what the big issues will be next year at this time. I mean, we could have any number of issues. Look at how fast something like COVID came up and completely changed the landscape of 2020. So you really don't know. But both are capable, very well spoken. They know the issues. I thought Innes's interview was great. He did fantastic. And so I think that you've got a candidate who is well prepared, ready to go, who's got a good story. And here we go, going into the fall. Let's see what happens now.
And I guess the only other question I would have, do you remember, I'm just trying to think in the past on a Senate race, because I know, just thinking candidly here, I know Gordon Humphrey had served in the U.S. Senate and then went back in went to the state Senate. We ever had kind of a former U.S. Senator, although Brown was a Senator Mass candidate here in New Hampshire, run against a sitting state senator in the same party? I'm just trying to reflect back, and I'm not sure.
Oh my God.
That's a good trivia question, isn't it? Neil, don't be hard on yourself. I asked J-Dog the other day, when's the last time the Patriots and the Bruins went into a season coming up with new coaches? And he pulled it up. He goes, back when Belichick joined the Patriots. So I don't know if there's a time when we've had a state senator going against the U.S. senator in the same party for the U.S. Senate primary nomination.
Yeah, I can't recall that. I'm sure someone listening probably has the encyclopedia in their head and can figure this out. And, going back in history, these are things. But what do these jobs mean, these previous jobs? It's when you're looking at the race now, it's what have you done for me lately and can you raise money? You could be a U.S. senator and be out of the mix for 10 years and not know any of the donors anymore, and that could put you in a troubled spot. So I think that these people they're gonna have to prove their candidacies by raising money at this point and starting to put together some exposure and some activists.
Neil, I want to ask you one last question. I don't mean to broadside you because it's interesting as these races develop. J-Dog, real quickly, you sent me, and I want to pull it up. Lucas Harrington, I think it is, J-Dog. Yeah, we have I'm trying to get the name of the candidate, but running as a Democrat, right, J-Dog, I believe, in the 1st Congressional District. We have another candidate. Right now we have Stephanie Shaheen and Mara Sullivan in there, right? And I guess the question is, I believe it's Carly and it's J-Dog, help me out. Is it Barriant? Carly Barriant, who's running in the 1st New Hampshire district as a Democrat, wanted to take on Stephanie Shaheen and Mara Sullivan. Do we know anything about this candidate? And it's interesting because it makes you wonder in the Chris Pappas U.S. Senate picture as a Democrat nominee, the incumbent congressman, 1st district, or former, he's still in the 1st district. Will he get a challenge from a Democrat? And I've not heard. I think we're going to have her on the show tomorrow morning. But do you know anything about this candidate, Carly's, her background?
She's a Harvard professor. She lives, I believe, in Hampton, and she's extremely articulate. And she's making her way sort of as a grassroots candidate. And I think the best.
How did you know all that? I'm reading her background right now. She lives in Hampton.
Yeah, the best thing was they said,
"Oh my goodness, she went to Mount."
Said, why not?
She went to Mount Holyoke College where my sister went. That's interesting. She'll like that. Yeah, she's been interesting. Yeah, interesting background. All right, well, that's gonna, Neil, that's gonna be. A lot of people are talking about the Senate race. We haven't seen a Democrat step up yet to run against Kelly Ayotte in the governor's race, but that 1st district Democrat primary is getting to be a real battle royale.
And because of that, I would expect that sort of a grassroots liberal Democrat may emerge to run for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
Just to mix it up a little bit.
Interesting. All right, Neil, good stuff. Neil Levesque, Institute of Politics, St. Anselm College. Stay cool. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Jack.
All right. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google. Play the Pulse of an H. Jack Heath, the illustrious one, J-Dog on the boards. Back in a moment.
107.7 on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
Well, I guess this heat advisory is real. You know what I'm noticing more on this one, J-Dog, versus a few weeks ago, it was just hot, is how humid. You notice that?
Yeah.
It's very humid. Feels like Florida right now. But that's what we're in through today. And I guess tomorrow, because things are going to dry out a little bit and maybe not quite as hot on Friday, we might get some, depending on where you are. And these recent thunder boomers, the bigger ones, they've tended to be in the central, more northern corridor and western part of the state than versus the coast for whatever reason. But who knows on this one? But tomorrow afternoon, we could see some, as they say, even hail, which is hard to believe after this hot, humid stuff. Busy show. Top of the 10 o'clock. We will tell you, you got to help me on this one, Jake. I don't have it open, but we're going to talk about a ride. Is it to help Special Olympics, J-Dog, or are you going to have to help me out? Oh, it's not, I believe. Was that?
Lydia's house.
Lydia's house. We're going to learn about that. So that's a good cause, and I appreciate that. It's coming up. So don't worry about it. You're going to learn all the details at 10 this morning. More of my interview are his first live interview since announcing he's running for the U.S. Senate here in New Hampshire. State Senator Republican Dan Innes. That'll be coming up a little bit. And we have a whole lot more. Interesting. I shared from, I think he's a representative, or is he a state senator? I think Tim Lang. Give me a moment here. But he's a lawmaker in Concord, I believe, and he put out, the Governor Ayotte. People haven't noticed this. She, had some vetoes. It's interesting. She vetoed, Governor Ayotte vetoed a Republican-backed bill aimed at banning certain books in schools. And she said we already had laws to deal with that. So Governor Kelly Ayotte's continuing to put kind of an independent brand on her governorship, I guess is the way to put it. But Mr. Lang posted something I shared. I thought it was interesting, and he talked about tax burden by state. This is interesting, folks, because taxes matter. So when you look at the country, tax burden by state, and this is I'll source this a little bit, I guess. This is a study. I shared one of these a few weeks ago, into a study on taxation, for example, comparing Mass and Maine. And by the way, when people say it's unfair to compare New Hampshire and Maine, it's not. We have roughly the same population. Yes, Maine's a much bigger physical state, but both New Hampshire and Maine are aging age-wise. It's harder to compare New Hampshire and Massachusetts because of the size of Massachusetts, but Maine is physically bigger, but not population really. Look at in the tax burden in this study, the highest tax burden in the country gets up to about, or the highest tax burden period is 12%. Now that's all taxes. Lowest tax burden is about 5%. Okay, you ready for this? This is really telling. So the high end of taxes, total tax burden, total taxes to live in a state. So make it simple. Total taxes, high 12, low 5. New Hampshire's 5.6%. Maine, anyone want to take a guess? Almost 11%. It's almost twice as much taxation, the burden, the highest tax burden to live in Maine than New Hampshire. Why? I ask why. No one out there seems to answer that. Why is Maine fiscally so expensive to live in? Don't say it's because it's an aging state. New Hampshire is. And we don't really think about this because you don't think about something you have. You sometimes think about something you no longer have, but you don't think about something you have. We do not have an income or sales tax in New Hampshire. Florida, Ron DeSantis on his way out trying to make them he calls it the freest state in the country, but they have a sales tax. They don't have an income tax. We don't have. New Hampshire does not have. July 16th, 2025, all this time, we do not have a state income or sales tax. We're the only state around us that's the truth. We have a total tax burden that's about half of the state of Maine. 5.6% according to this study. Total tax burden. Maine, almost 11%. And they have an income and sales tax. Can anyone explain to me, wanting the HE double hockey sticks, how that is that Maine taxes its citizens. Do you know that in Maine, I think this is part of the budget that, Governor Janet Mills, you know her, right? Remember her? She's still governor. She seems more fixated on fighting for men to be able to play in women's sports than she is on helping taxpayers. That's just my observation. She puts a lot of zeal and energy into that. Do you know Maine, the budget they just signed in the state of Maine, if you like all of us streaming, think about our media consumption. We get thousands of listeners every morning now streaming on our app at the Pulse of an H or a smart device or a desktop. Hey, Alexa, hey, Google, play the Pulse of an H. In addition to our AM and FM, really great News Talk network, right up into Maine, New Hampshire, Lakes region, Manchester, Concord, Seacoast, WTSN, AM and FM, adding the 98.7 FM HD2 over in the Seacoast if you like digital clarity. So with all that, people are streaming. And if you're like me and you watch a movie, a show on Netflix or Hulu or Tubi, you're streaming. Do you know Maine has added for audio and video streaming a 5.5% consumption tax for streaming? Yeah, Maine's now taxing you if you live there, if you watch Netflix. Streaming consumption tax. Legal cannabis tax. They don't do much there about the illegal Chinese operators for cannabis pot, but they want to tax. Prescription medication. Oh, then I love this one. Let's tax the people who smoke cigarettes even more. Oh yeah, income sales tax, almost 11% total tax burden. And by the way, one of the fourth highest property tax burden per capita of any state in the country, ahead of California, Connecticut, Maine, not New Hampshire. No income, no sales tax. Let's keep it that way. Hey, Alexa, Google, play the Pulse of an H. Back with the 10 o'clock hour in a moment.